They have to do the salvific, redemptive work of social justice in order to make themselves feel like good people. Hey guys, I'm Bill Westers, and this is the Encountering Truth podcast. Welcome to the Encountering Truth podcast, where we examine the evidence for Christianity, engage culture with kindness and conviction, and encounter Jesus as the way, the truth, and the life. Well, on a previous episode, I shared with you guys that I had just returned from the Cross-Examined Instructors Academy, and I based that episode on the presentation that I gave at CIA about the circumlocution, talking around God when you can't talk about God, and leading people towards Christ when you can't lead them to Christ, when you're limited in what you can say openly about your faith, like in a public school or something similar to that. Okay, well, in this episode, I'm going to give you the other presentation that I did at the Cross-Examined Instructor Academy. And so this one is called Religion in Public Schools. Okay, so before we begin, if you haven't done so already, make sure you subscribe to the podcast. Make sure that you go and you share it with your friends on social media. Leave us a good review on Spotify, on Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen. Follow the Facebook page, and of course, visit our website, encounteringtruth.org. So, earlier this summer, many Christians rejoiced because on June 19th, Louisiana Governor Jeff Landry signed into law a bill requiring the Ten Commandments to be posted in every public school classroom throughout the state. Now, of course, this came under a great deal of scrutiny, particularly from activists who claimed that it violated the Establishment Clause of the First Amendment, which says that Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion. And then, of course, the Free Exercise Clause comes right after that. It says, or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. So, before we get into this, now, one of the things that we have to understand about the First Amendment and the Establishment Clause is many people think that this was actually designed to keep the religion out of government. They associate this with the separation of church and state, which is actually not even in the Constitution. That's a separate letter that we're not going to talk about, but it's not actually in the Constitution. But the real goal of this, you could argue, is not to keep religion out of the government, but to actually keep government out of religion, from messing with religion. Regardless, this law in Louisiana could very well end up at the Supreme Court, where, ironically, in the very structure of that building, there's a depiction of Moses holding the Ten Commandments. Now, I've been a teacher for 21 years, and I actually began my career teaching in Louisiana. For 13 years. I taught for 7 years in the private Christian schools before moving into the public schools. And yes, in Louisiana, there are more Christian teachers and influence in the schools, being a more conservative state in the Bible Belt. But it actually wasn't until about 8 years ago, when I moved to teach back in my home state of Michigan, that I experienced a certain religious dogmatism that I had never experienced in Louisiana schools. But as we know from religions like Buddhism and whatnot, and even from a Supreme Court decision in 1987, it says a religion need not posit a belief in God. And so what we have is this godless religion of progressivism. You might even call it wokeism, that has infiltrated public schools. Because what happens when you attempt to remove religion, man simply directs his devotion elsewhere. And really all you end up left with is this religious equivalent of secular humanism, which, by the way, in that 1987 Supreme Court decision, secular humanism actually was determined to be the equivalent of a religion, complete with its own statement of principles, or you could say belief statements. Okay, but it's based on this idea of naturalism. But the problem with naturalism is that it has no way to account for moral values or for the guilt that we experience when we break the moral law. Okay, and so essentially what you're doing is you're dividing man between what Francis Schaeffer would call the lower story of facts and nature, and then the upper story of beliefs and morals and values. But then they still believe that morals are real things, but in order to have this belief that moral values actually exist in this naturalistic worldview, one has to actually take a leap of faith to the upper story of morals and beliefs and values, and just simply believe that morals are a real thing and not just an illusion of the mind. And so it's this division of facts and nature with the mind, and you have to take a Kierkegaardian leap of faith to that upper story to believe. And so in essence, what's happening here is that people are living in tension with in inconsistent world views that cannot account for moral values. And as Francis Schaeffer says, he says it's impossible for any non-Christian individual or group to become consistent to their system in logic or in practice. In fact, he says that non-Christians have no absolute anywhere in the universe. And without an absolute, one cannot really have morals as morals. For them, everything is relative. They still, though, feel that guilt bearing down on them from breaking those morals. And so they want to still be good people. But what's left to them is this idea of secular humanism, this progressivism. And so they have to fight oppression and read the sacred texts like how to be an anti-racist, okay, or white fragility and things like that. Okay, they have to do the salvific, redemptive work of social justice in order to make themselves feel like good people. But they actually have no way to even ground those things as morally good in their naturalistic worldview. They are living an inconsistent, incompatible worldview where they cannot reconcile the nature, the facts and nature of that lower story with the morals and values of the upper story. So let's go back to that Louisiana law that requires the 10 Commandments to be posted in every classroom, every public school classroom throughout the state. What the ACLU and the Americans United for Separation of Church and State and the Freedom from Religion Foundation they've come together and issued a statement that says the law prevents students from getting an equal education and will keep children from who have different beliefs, there's that upper story, from feeling safe at school. Now, that word safe is important. We're going to come back to it, but think about this. Picture a classroom with a simple poster posted on the wall with the 10 Commandments. Apparently, according to the ACLU and those others, that's that little poster, that poster-sized depiction of the 10 Commandments makes kids feel unsafe and keeps them somehow from getting an equal education. Now, keeps them from feeling safe. There's that word safe. You see, everything today in education tends to be framed in this language of safety, belonging, inclusion, and equity. Why? Well, I believe that it goes back to something that's been used for a very long time in education as well as in other fields, the social sciences and whatnot, called Maslow's hierarchy of needs. You've probably heard about it before, but it's this triangle depicting the different levels of of human needs for flourishing, for achievement, and all that. So at the very bottom, the very basic, most fundamental needs are physiological needs, like food, water, and shelter. Okay, obvious, right? But right above that is the need for safety and security. Okay, there's that word safety. Okay, and then right above that is love and belonging. Okay, so these are very fundamental, basic human needs. Okay, and if we can frame all of this in this idea of these factual sounding, these natural sounding words of safety and belonging, well, then it's going to add a great deal of importance and impetus to incorporate these ideas into the classroom. Okay, well, how do we teach this stuff then? Well, in comes social emotional learning, SEL. Now, social emotional learning is all about healthy identities, managing emotions, empathy, relationships, and decision making. On the surface, those are good, positive sounding words and language, right? But as we've talked about many times on this podcast, beware of language. There is a such thing called linguistic theft, okay, where they take words and they subtly redefine them without overtly describing and explaining what they actually mean by them. So we always want to clarify our terms. Okay, what do you mean by that? Okay, if anybody ever brings up certain confusing words, make sure you have them define those words, because when you say that word and when they say that word, it might actually be two different definitions that you're relying on, and they are you're assuming that you're talking about the same thing, but you're actually talking about two very different things that are underlying that term. Okay, so always make sure that we are identifying, defining our terms when we're talking about these things, because on the surface, like I said, healthy identities, managing emotions, empathy, relationships, decision making, these are all positive things. And of course, every student, every adult even, needs to be able to do these things and incorporate these things in their lives. But social emotional learning, because it sounds good and because it does have some pros and some advantages to it, it actually serves as a Trojan horse for some very bad ideas. Ideas like Marxism, CRT, critical race theory, okay, queer theory, transgenderism, mindfulness practices, or otherwise known as Buddhist meditation, right? Okay, and a whole lot of what Abigail Schreier would call bad therapy, and she wrote a whole book about bad therapy, and she talks about some of this social emotional learning in that book. Okay, outstanding book, just like her first book called Irreversible Damage. But how do we know that SEL is a Trojan horse for all of these bad ideas? Well, if you go to the website for CASEL, that is the Collaborative for Academic Social Emotional Learning, casel.org, CASEL.org. Okay, you can read it for yourselves from their mouths, their mind, what they are actually saying themselves. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to read this for you, because this entire program is based on neo-Marxist assumptions. Okay, so listen to these descriptions that they put right on their website. Okay, they say that SEL can help address various forms of inequity and empower young people and adults to co-create thriving schools and contribute to safe, there's that word safe, healthy, and just communities. They go on to say that inequities based on race, ethnicity, class, language, gender identity, and sexual orientation. These are their words, not mine. Gender identity and sexual orientation and other factors are what they say. They say deeply ingrained in the vast majority of these systems. Okay? These are based on neo-Marxist assumptions. This is just them saying this is the facts. Okay? But it's really assumptions. Okay? And finally, they say that SEL can create the conditions needed for individuals and schools to interrupt into inequitable policies and practices, create more inclusive learning environments. Okay? As you see, right from their own words, okay, these neo-Marxist assumptions, okay, based on critical theory. Okay, now social emotional learning has what they call the CASEL 5. Again, you can find this on the CASEL website, casel.org, and I will post that in the show notes, but it's the Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning. But this CASEL 5, there's a diagram that you can find right on their website that at the very center of this, it's these concentric circles, right? So kind of think of a ripple effect going from the center outward. But at the very center, we have what they call the CASEL 5, and that's self-awareness, okay, which could be, self-aware, being aware of your own emotions and feelings, right? Or it could be aware that maybe you're a boy trapped in a girl's body. Then self-management is the next one. How do you manage that feeling of being a boy trapped in a girl's body? Or maybe maybe it's just managing our feelings in general, right? Yeah, we'll just say that. See, they mask it. Okay, it's these deceptive labels that they put on there. Okay, and they offer some description, but don't go into detail about what they really mean by these things. But if we understand based on what we read earlier, it's very clear that they're laying that groundwork for these ideas. Okay. Finally, next, I should say, is responsible decision making. Now, here's where they talk about making responsible decisions regarding personal behavior and social interactions across diverse situations. You're using words like diverse. But here they're also encouraging what they would say open-mindedness on how to make decisions, open-mindedness, right? And then we move on to relationship skills, okay, is the fourth of the CASEL 5, relationship skills. And so now we're talking about interacting with people. In this category, they talk about cultural competency. They talk about how to effectively navigate settings with diverse individuals and groups. Now, pause there a second. Those are their words, not mine. Diverse individuals. What does that mean? I can think of a group being diverse, made up of people from different backgrounds and different ethnicities and different areas and thought ideologies and whatnot. Okay? A group can be diverse. An individual cannot be diverse. Right? Diverse requires inner differences. Okay? So they're throwing that word diverse in there for no apparent reason except that they're connecting it to these neo-Marxist ideas. Okay? All right, finally, let's move on to that number 5 of the CASEL 5. Social awareness. This is the big one. Okay? This is identifying diverse norms, including unjust ones, they say. And then basically how you interact in society. So identifying these social norms and how you interact with them. Okay? Social awareness. Being aware of where people are in society. In other words, this lines up really well with what we talked about a while back on this podcast with Marxism and intersectionality. Okay, checking those boxes. Where have you been oppressed? And by race, gender, sexual identity, okay, gender identity, okay, or sexual orientation, certain religions in class. So these boxes of oppression, that matrix of oppression, okay, or again what we talked about a while back with the wheel of privilege and power. Okay, this is what they are encouraging. This is where they're going to bring all of these gender identities in the sexual orientation. This is where they're going to bring that in, and encourage kids. Well, be aware, this relationship skills and social awareness and where people are in relation to each other. Okay, and we have to think about put ourselves in their shoes. Well, of course, we care for people. Okay, we love people with the love of Christ. Every individual has been made in the image of God and holds intrinsic dignity. Okay, is valued as an image bearer of God. Okay, and of course, we have to treat people with equality, with love, with compassion. Okay, but this Castle 5, we have to be aware of what all these deceptive labels can include, and it's in the water. Okay, someone asked me when I was at CIA giving this presentation about is this what they're teaching at the schools? No, they're actually not teaching it. Okay, this is, but it's not just in Michigan. It's all over. This is the big new thing. SEL, social emotional learning, but it's not something that's actually outright literally taught in a classroom. No, this lays the foundation. This is the filter through which all education and all teaching goes. Okay, and so in the public schools, this basically lays that foundation for how to do these things, how to teach. Okay, and this it opens that door wide open to bring these bad ideas in. Okay, and remember that ideas have consequences and bad ideas have victims. Okay, so another thing I want you to notice, if you ever go to the Castle website and you look at this diagram, like I said, it's concentric circles, and at that very center, that means it's like that ripple effect, like circle surrounding a circle surrounding a circle, right? So at the very center we have the Castle 5, and that's in the classrooms, right? The classroom teacher teaching these skills and values to the students to push them then out towards the schools is the next ring out, and then to the families and caregivers, and then to the broader community. Okay, so again, at the center of the circles, we have the classrooms, okay, where the teachers are being able to instill these values and skills into the students and talk about the Castle 5, self-awareness, self-management, responsible decision-making, relationship skills, and social awareness. So the classroom teachers at the center, pushing it out to the schools and then the families and broader community. So what's happening? The classroom teacher is usurping the role of the parents and family as the one who instills values and these ideas. Okay, trying to push them out to the families and then the broader community. Okay, and so these classroom teachers are teaching this, and so they become like the clergy of this progressivism, teaching this works-based religion of progressivism. Okay, and so that's why when they post a job posting like the one at my school, okay, when they post a job listing, it is literally within the job description of a teacher that they intend to hire. Is this willingness and commitment. This is the words in the job description, in the job postings that they put out. A willingness and commitment to include equity, social justice, and inclusion in all practices. Okay, let me say that again. Literally written within the job listing, the job description of any potential employee. These words are in the job description, and it's not just my school, okay? But it says willingness and commitment to include equity, social justice, and inclusion in all practices. That's also why we have these restorative circles in classes. Okay, where we sit around in a circle, the teacher sits down at the level of the kids and acts kind of like a facilitator. They pass around a talking piece, okay, or there's other methods behind it, but you pass around a talking piece. We talk about our problems. We talk about injustices. We talk about, what we're thinking and ideas going on. And, or, sometimes, yeah, sure, we'll talk about content, okay, but these restorative circles have become, Abigail Schreier puts it as, is like these opportunities for co-rumination on our problems, right? And in this bad therapy, in her words, okay. It's also this religion of progressivism is also why during a school day, teachers can take their students on a field trip to listen to an activist professor of women, gender, and sexuality studies. Okay? An activist professor who on her website claims that she is devoted to intersections of gender, race, and place. Okay? During school hours, they go to this type of stuff and claim that it's good. Okay? This is also why our administration several years back claimed that we, as a faculty and staff of the school, we don't like this particular Michigan law that prohibits teachers from recommending abortion clinics to our students. Let me say that again. Our administration claims that we don't like, in other words, implying that we shouldn't like, this Michigan law that prohibits us as faculty and teachers and staff from recommending abortion clinics to our students. I'm sorry, but who in their right mind is going to be doing this in the first place? There were teachers that were upset. This is despicable. Okay? In what situation is it ever okay for a teacher to step over that line and recommend an abortion clinic to a young child who is pregnant? This is unspeakable, unthinkable. But yet, we as a faculty we don't like this law because it keeps us from doing that. We can't support our students. Okay? It's also why this religion of progressivism, we have administrators telling us that we should respect students' pronouns and not tell their parents about a gender transition if they don't want us to. Why? Because we want the child to feel safe at school. Okay, there's that word safe. Safety, support, belonging, inclusion. These are deceptive, good sounding, okay, nice sounding words, but they are deceptive. Okay, and they are the framework for all of this Trojan horse for all of these bad ideas. So again, go back to that picture of a classroom in your mind and picture a poster on the wall that has 10 statements of what thou shalt and thou shalt not do. Okay, the 10 commandments on a poster size. That is supposedly going to make children feel unsafe in the classroom. Okay? Keep them from feeling safe and keep them from getting an equal education. But yet somehow we can have drag queens coming into schools, reading stories to children, doing lap dances, okay, and so much other disgusting, immoral stuff. A poster on the wall of the 10 Commandments makes them feel unsafe. But at the beginning of a class, doing Buddhist meditation practices and calling it mindfulness, breathing techniques or whatever, and literally implementing these Buddhist meditation practices. Okay, planting your feet on the floor, ground yourself, open your palms, close your eyes. Now picture, where is your favorite place? What is your favorite taste? Now our five senses, go through those. Now you smell something. What smell makes you feel happy? This is I'm not joking around about on this, guys. This is literally the very type of thing that we did just a year or two ago at a professional development led by an administrator, telling us to plant our feet, close our eyes, picture ourselves and inhale and exhale. And it's really these mindfulness practices, these Buddhist meditation practices. Okay, so we need to wrap this up. But again, picture yourself in that classroom with one singular poster on the wall. That makes people feel unsafe. But drag queen story hour, Buddhist meditation practices, okay, restorative circles where you're put on the spot and have to talk about, the bad experiences or whatever experiences in your life. Okay, these are just supposed to be considered. It's all supposed to be this good, healthy, but non-religious activities to help students with social emotional learning skills like self-awareness and self-management and decision making and relationship skills and social awareness. Okay, it's all about the terms, and we need to be aware of what's going on in our schools with our children. And we always go back to that idea of inoculation. Okay, you might not be able to pull your child out of a public school. Okay, you might not be able to afford a private religious Christian school. You might not be able to have the time off of work or the money to be able to homeschool your children. Okay, but even if you were to do all of those things, okay, or any of those, in the end, it doesn't matter. We have to understand what's being pushed, not just in public education, but in the culture, because every child is going to come across this stuff, whether they're in the public schools or not, and we can't just shelter our children. Okay, we can do our best to shelter them to a certain degree, but in that sheltering, in that protective period, we need to be inoculating them with these bad ideas, giving them in small enough doses, explaining, helping them to understand so that when they are confronted with it, they know how to deal with it and they can fight it off because they've been inoculated against these bad ideas. So that's all for today, guys. Thank you so much for listening. And remember that we make it our goal to examine the evidence, engage culture, and encounter Jesus. God bless. We'll see you next time.